All right. Hey, folks. So today's November 4th, November 5th in some places, 2021. And I'd like to welcome you to our November webinar of 2021 with Trina and Doug as our main presenters today. Again, my name is Megan Kirby. I'm the Dissemination and Implementation Specialist with Language Dynamics Group. So today we're going to be talking about or getting a research synthesis, right, on all of the research that's been published in what I would like to clump together 2020 and 2021 as one big year. And so I'm going to show you right now a little bit about where you can find the information we're going to be discussing today. So what you'll see right here is our website. And when you go to the research tab at the top, and if this changes, just go with the flow here. Research, and then right here at the top of the screen, it says you've got these peer-reviewed or published studies. But guess what? We've already downloaded a research synthesis, or we have a downloadable research synthesis for you. And it looks like this. Okay. So you can you not see it?
That's not it.
Oh, well, I'll upload it. That's what.
Yes. Weren't we just talking about?
Sorry.
There we go. That's the one.
Yes. The independent review is underneath it. I accidentally clicked that. So it's the purple tab that you're going to want to click. And we're going to go over that today. And then just check this out. How cool is this? But we have infographics already made for you so that for whatever reason, time usually is the first major thing. You want to get a quick summary of that study and what it was about. And really, if you think about putting it into a narrative frame, you know, the characters, the setting, the problem we're trying to solve, right? And then what the researchers did in their methods. And then we've got the ending, we've got our discussion, conclusion. So we've got that together, all put together for you in these independent studies, or individual studies, but we've got this one tab right here that we encourage you to download free. And then, yeah, that's kind of what we're going to go over today. So I'm going to turn it over to Trina and Doug. You probably should introduce yourself since not everybody has been in attendance at a training or webinar with you. And so, yeah, why don't we start with you, Trina?
Do you want to stop your screen share?
I am going to do that now.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm Trina Spencer. Hey, everyone. It's been a while since I've been on a webinar for LDG, so it's fun. I love to do these. I think Doug does too. We just get really busy, so we're like happy to let somebody else jump in. I'm an associate professor at University of South Florida. I am a board certified behavior analyst, special ed teacher, school psychologist. I have lots and lots of different trainings. I think I just am addicted to learning. And so I want to go to school for the rest of my life. So I took a job as a professor so that I could learn for the rest of my life. And if you don't know, I'm also let's see, what's the right word? I'm very passionate about learning about language. And so my buddy Doug has taught me lots about language. And then I kind of what's the right word? I outgrew him. He couldn't teach me as fast as I wanted to learn. So I had to find some other learning and other teachers. Right, Doug? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah. All right. And I've had to put up with this guy for I don't know, 13, 14, 15 years. It's been a while.
It's been torture. I know. I'm so sorry.
Oh, we love it. Even though I like to complain about you, I love every minute I get with you. So.
Whoa, that sounds like an exaggeration.
I don't exaggerate. I just tell the truth. So there.
Okay. Was that your handoff to me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hey,
but maybe I should be like, Doug, it's your turn.
It's okay. I generally can pick up social cues sometimes. So yeah, I'm Doug Petersen. I'm at Brigham Young University. I'm a professor here in our Department of Communication Disorders. And I love researching language and dynamic assessment. And we'll talk quite a bit about those things today. And I love interacting with speech language pathologists and teachers and reading specialists and special educators and psychologists. I learned so much from all of them, and Trina is one of those. I've learned so much from her. And it's definitely expanded my world, right? I mean, it's very much a world now of research for hopefully things that work for all children. And so I'm excited to share some of the research findings that we have come up with, findings that we found this year. This is gonna be very informal.
You know big words, Doug.
Yeah, I know big words. Listen, guys, this is very informal for me. I apologize if you were looking for something super, black tie. So I'm very excited to be here with you guys though. So thank you. And thanks, Megan, for organizing this. It's going to be a lot of fun.
A little bit of context before we get started into like what y'all have been up to just within 2 years. So not going all the way back, but I think it's a really cool story to know the context from the two of you joining forces together. But the products that LDG has and the research you've done have started from your dissertations. So I find that so cool. And then the commitment that you both have had then from really early in your career to then taking it and then sticking with it and still researching it, right? And making improvements in this iterative design process that you both have. I just want everybody to know that it's been that long, that it's not a one and done. And so I think it's super cool. And just a testament, right, to your commitment to the individuals and the children, that they deserve the best and the highest quality. So that being said, do either one of you want to kick it off with some of your favorite research from the past 2 years?
Should we start with dynamic assessment?
Yes, I think so.
I think that's a good one because sometimes it doesn't get as much attention. Like Story Champs tends to like overshadow some of our dynamic assessment stuff. And that might be because I'm bossier than Doug. And well, the other thing too is that he and I do everything together, like in partnership, but he likes the assessment research more than I do. And by the way, I'm the school psychologist and develop assessment tools too. It's not my favorite thing in the world. Intervention, however, is my favorite thing. So I tend to be really like overly excited about Story Champs and all that kind of interventions and stuff. So I'm going to let Doug talk about dynamic assessment and be less bossy today, even though I just bossed you around.
Yeah, that's not how it works. Okay, so I'm really excited about a publication that just came out. It was literally just published this week in Logopedia, Phoniatria y Audiología. And it's in English though, so don't worry about it. And this is a study where we did 2 studies actually in one, and it is to examine how well a Spanish dynamic assessment can identify children with and without language disorder in Guatemala and in Mexico. And it's this cross-validation study. So here's how it worked. We went to Guatemala with my dear friend Christiana Deschert and some amazing students. And we went to Guatemala and administered this dynamic assessment of language, narrative language to children down there. And what we got was 100% sensitivity and 100% specificity. So with this Spanish dynamic assessment, we were able to identify children with and without language disorder with perfect accuracy. So now you can get that kind of sensitivity and specificity the first time around when you're doing a dynamic assessment study, because you get to choose which dynamic assessment variables are most predictive or most that have the greatest sensitivity and specificity. And it turned out that the variables that we chose were actually the same ones that always emerge in the research, that it was the modifiability rating scale, the scale that the examiner fills out that indicates how difficult it was for the child to learn language. And also it was the post-test score. Those 2 in combination got us that 100% sensitivity and specificity. So that's great, of course, but that's not at all sufficient to show that an assessment has real strong validity or evidence of validity, the results. So we went to Mexico and connected with Maria Nelly, who was a former, wasn't Maria a former PhD student of yours?
Yeah, doc student. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
in applied linguistics.
Yeah, she's fabulous. And so we collaborated with her and administered the same Spanish dynamic assessment to students in Mexico. And as expected, we got great sensitivity and specificity, but it was not 100% sensitivity and specificity. I probably should have the study in front of me so I can tell you what it really was, but it was great. I mean, it was somewhere in the 90s, I think. So, and that's a nice cross-validation piece of evidence, right? It's sort of like this assessment works well for this Spanish-speaking population and also for another Spanish-speaking population. Now, I am talking parametrically here, which is not appropriate because our sample sizes were not large enough to actually represent the whole population, but great preliminary research. I probably should know whether a Spanish dynamic assessment has ever been published or not before. I'd have to go through and read my intro, but if there has been one, it's only been one or two, right? So this is very much at the cutting edge of dynamic assessment research. And I'll take a breath in a moment, but I just need to say that what's exciting about this is that this is a dynamic assessment that can be used in all of the countries where Spanish is the primary language for the majority of the children. And it, of course, could be used in countries like the United States or Canada or Australia as well, where you have a Spanish-speaking child. So that's one dynamic assessment study that I'm very excited about.
What about some of the dynamic assessment studies that were published in English with kids in the States? And you had like Spanish speaking kiddos in some of those participant groups, like.
Yes.
But
yes.
you didn't give them a Spanish dynamic assessment. You gave them an English dynamic assessment, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we are just finishing up two studies, one with Anaide Robles and her team, and the other one with Ashley Fromm. And these are master's level students at BYU. They just graduated. And what they did was a large dynamic assessment study with about 365 students. And I think it was around 115 of them had language disorder. And they did a dynamic assessment study on what we call the DIAMOND, this dynamic assessment of narrative language. And now does this count? Because we haven't published this yet. This is something we just finished up.
I was actually trying to get you to talk about the other ones because we had the inferential word learning one that was published in 2020.
Yes.
And wasn't one of the precursors for the Pearl also published in 2020?
Yes, this is true. So Megan, this is my fault. I only went back like 1 year and I didn't go back 2 years. I'm sorry and I'm having a hard time keeping track of all this. But let me just finish up these master's theses though, because I am super excited about them. Where this is the largest dynamic assessment study that's been done, and we found 85-90% sensitivity and specificity, and a lot of the children were culturally and linguistically diverse. And we also found, here's something that I think is so interesting. We found that it didn't matter your race or ethnicity. It didn't matter what your grade was or your gender. None of those variables affected your modifiability score. So when examiners were measuring how easy or difficult it was for you to learn language, your prior exposure, your English language learning status also was not a factor. None of those variables were factors in how you were rated in your modifiability, which is really this within child factor. So I was really excited to find that as well.
Mm-hmm. Just as a kind of a sort of a thought here, like our dynamic assessments, Language Dynamics Group publishes one or produces or sells, I don't know, it's commercially available by them. It's called the Pearl, Predictive Early Assessment of Reading and Language. And there's quite a bit of research already published on that, right? And that's the reason why it's available. We do the research before we let LDG publish it. So that's the reason why Doug's really talking about the new stuff, is that that's what we do the research on. And then it turns into more products. And so in our future, we're going to be able to commercialize the DIAMOND, which is a diagnostic tool for identifying developmental language disorder. And specifically, because it's a dynamic assessment, it's going to reduce the cultural linguistic bias that goes along with static assessment. So that just, for those of you who don't know, like we do the research and then we push it out to LDG to supply to the users, people out there. So sometimes it's hard for us to keep track, us as the researchers, sometimes it's hard to keep track of what actually is available, because that's not our day-to-day life. It's the new stuff, right? But we have a dynamic assessment of decoding, a dynamic assessment of narratives, and a dynamic assessment of inferential word learning. And we have publications in all three of those things, but the ones he's talking about are iterations and newer versions of these that are going to be specifically diagnostics for language disorders. Yes, Doug?
Yes, and so let me talk about this one that you were referring to, this dynamic assessment of vocabulary, this dynamic assessment of inferential word learning. So this is published in LSHSS, and this is published with Penny Ton, who is a former master's student of mine, and then with Trina Spencer and Matthew Foster, who's also at USF. So here's what I think is particularly exciting about this study. Our vocabulary tests, our norm referenced static vocabulary tests, are very, very poor. They do a terrible job, actually, let me not mince words, at identifying language disorder. And if you look at Spalding, Plant, Farinella's 2006 paper where they reviewed these vocabulary assessments, you'll find that those vocabulary tests in particular come out as the weakest of all of our norm reference tests. So what we did was we compared a dynamic assessment of vocabulary where we measured a child's ability to learn to infer the meaning of nonsense words. And we compared that to the expressive and receptive one-word picture vocabulary test and a static measure from a language sample where we just looked at the number of different words. And long story short, we found that this dynamic assessment had, depending on where you draw your cut line, right, had anywhere from 90 to 100% sensitivity and 90 to 95% specificity. And we compared that to the static measures, which the receptive and expressives, those vocabulary tests had like 10%. I think the receptive had 10% sensitivity and the expressive had 0% sensitivity. And the number of different words, that just single little number of different words measured from a language sample, also had very poor sensitivity. So that was a very exciting finding. I hope that you guys can all take a moment to read through that article. So, okay, Trina, I'm taking up all the time and I feel a little bad about that. I have more I need to share, but let's move away from dynamic assessment. Let's go on to the next topic. What do you have for us, Trina?
Well, hold on. Let me just say because I want to get people excited, but what are the implications? Like, why do we want dynamic assessment? So for the folks that are just entering into this, and what makes it better than what we currently have? Can you speak that for like 2 minutes?
Yeah, Trina, do you want to do that? Or you want me to do that?
You do it.
Okay, sure. That answer is actually quite simple. We have a very diverse population in the United States, but also diversity is all over this world. And when you have a heterogeneous population, it makes it very difficult to create a static test that is not biased against one particular group or another. And so you see this all the time. I'm going to use the United States as an example, where we have a lot of Spanish-speaking children in this country where their home language is Spanish. And a lot of these students are administered tests in English, and those tests clearly are linguistically biased against those children. And it just does these static, these single time measures will tell you what a person currently knows, and that can be confounded by many, many factors, right? Experience, language proficiency, whatever it might be. And so essentially you just don't get valid results. You don't know how to interpret the results of a test like that. You don't know if someone is doing poorly on a test because they have a disorder or if it's because of another factor, a difference. And so the dynamic assessment doesn't focus on measuring what someone knows. The dynamic assessment focuses on how well someone can learn something. It is all about learning potential, and we call that modifiability. And so that's the construct that it's measuring. And the reason why it mitigates cultural and linguistic bias is because it doesn't seem to matter where you come from, what your prior exposure to any language is, what your socioeconomic status is. All of these variables that confound static results, they tend to not make a meaningful difference with static assessment results, because what you're measuring is something very much within the child. How well can they learn? So that is why dynamic assessment is important. And it's also why dynamic assessment across multiple studies now consistently gets you 80 to 100% sensitivity and specificity, even with culturally and linguistically diverse individuals.
Thank you. Well, yay. All right. So people were jazzed up about it. All right, Trina. Well, you want to get folks jazzed about narratives?
Sure. I guess about story champs in general, those are some of the studies that we've published in the last couple of years. I think there are 3 that really come to mind that I'd like to highlight. Actually, 4. I'm going to highlight 4. Okay, the first one is done with preschoolers, and we did a Head Start teacher delivered multi-tiered, so large group, small group, and it was in Spanish and English. So our kiddos who are Spanish speaking English learners received small group intervention on top of whole class instruction, and it alternated from Spanish, English, and the stories were strategically arranged so that they were getting kind of like beefed up academic language in Spanish, which is their home language. And then the next day it's a quick transfer. So you get a good cross-linguistic transfer the next day to English, which is the instruction of school in this situation. Now it went on for, I think it's like 32 weeks worth of instruction, 4 days a week, tiered. And the teaching assistants also assisted in the delivery of the Story Champs intervention, and the results are very exciting. This study produced large or moderate effects on norm reference assessments in receptive language, and we had meaningful effect size in the expressive language, like on the SELF-P, so clinical evaluations of language fundamentals P, which is a norm reference test. This is a very distal measure, but we improved both just expressive and receptive language. And I was very excited about that. Oh, and by the way, in both languages, in Spanish and in English, we also had vocabulary measures. So they also did really well and learned all the vocabulary words that we taught them. And we had another, like a listening comprehension measure that was also statistically significant with a moderate effect size. So that was a very fun study, and that was published in AERA Open at the beginning of 2020. I have another study that I want to tell about that actually Megan's the first author of. If you're familiar with our 2018 writing study, it's a Spencer and Petersen 2018. We did a small Story Champs intervention with a general ed kindergarten or general ed first grade teacher. Well, in Megan's study, we replicated that with kindergarten students. And so the teacher delivered 6 Story Champs lessons in small groups into her classroom, and the kindergarten kids wrote stories. It's a single case design study. You can see some really great samples of writing, and they didn't get any writing instruction, and their writing improved drastically. And quite large effect sizes. It's a single case design, but Megan knows fancy statistics to use with that, and that's what she did. And we found really nice large effects for all of the kids. It varies, but for all the kids, and that's published in Reading and Writing. Megan, is that what it is? Reading and Writing. And then the third study was done by a master's student in speech language pathology. Stephanie Raymond is the student. And she used Story Champs with 2 children who are hard of hearing and were aided. And her study is published in the Perspectives of ASHA journals. I think it's in the special interest group Perspectives for, I think it's called Deaf and Hard of Hearing Special Interest Group. Anyway, that's a really exciting study too, because what she found, she targeted both vocabulary and narrative retell, and one kid did better with the narrative retell and the other kid did better with the vocabulary. But it was interesting because they both needed something different from the intervention, but it was the same intervention, kind of differentiated for each kid. So that was also a single case design study, and I think that was a great clinical application because she delivered the intervention in the clinic, in the SLP clinic on our campus, just like a once a week kind of seeing her clients. That was and a great extension to a different population. And then the final Story Champ study I want to mention, Doug's actually the first author, but we have been partnering with SLPs in Michigan for, I don't know, like 7, 8, 10 years. I don't know. I'm really bad at keeping track, but a long time. And so this study we did several years ago, where we first started working with the SLPs, and then later the teachers wanted to get on board. And so we did a large scale randomized control trial with over 650 kids in kindergarten, something like 22 school districts or something. And so the teachers delivered a tier 1 Story Champs and the SLPs delivered a tier 2. And that paper is actually coming out any minute, right? It's in press, Doug, right? You don't have the proofs yet, do you?
I just got the proofs today.
Yay!
There it is, right in front of me.
Excellent. I can't wait to see it. But this is, in my opinion, Doug, as far as I know, it's one of the largest language intervention studies ever. And it was done kind of like as a pragmatic trial in schools with SLPs and teachers partnering together to work with these kindergarten kids. And then we have some data that follows them some time, and it shows the kids who are at risk, who were at risk in kindergarten, are performing as well as the kids who are not at risk, never got intervention in the later years. I don't know, Doug, do you want to add any more? And then our outcomes are actually like, do we have writing outcomes as well as retail outcomes?
We do. Yeah, we have writing outcomes. We have narrative writing outcomes. We have expository, oral language expository outcomes, and narrative oral language outcomes. And personal, narrative retells and personal stories that were generated. And I mean, yes, it's super exciting that you can see this very low dose. For the large group, it was just 2 times a week, 20 minutes, large classroom, the teacher was doing the intervention, and significant effects with those children in the treatment group. But then also, like Trina, you mentioned the children in the tier 2 group, when they were compared to, they're typically developing peers in the control group, and even compared to their advanced peers in the control group. The children in tier 2 in the treatment caught up to those students at the end of the 14 weeks of the intervention. And that is, to me, one of the most exciting things to find, that these children who were at risk, who were struggling relative to their peers, were able to catch up in those areas of personal stories, expository, and writing after just still a fairly short, low dose intervention, right? Where they're just getting 2 20-minute sessions of large group and 2 20-minute small group sessions every week.
Good. So I'm just watching the chat. I want to answer Ada's question, but it's going to require a lot more background information, so I asked to push it. But Janet's question is more relevant to the research about modifiability. And that's her questions are very, they're the reasons why people don't believe dynamic assessment is like good enough for mainstream, right? Because most people are like, this can't be reliable. This, there's got to be all this bias because the rater does this. Well, I can tell you that I have also led my own dynamic assessment studies. They're not published yet, but I specifically looked at the reliability of the rating scales for modifiability and fidelity of administering the assessments, and they were very high. We were very surprised, but they are very high. And what's interesting is a lot of the people who were administering the dynamic assessment was like, oh my gosh, it's so obvious. When a kid has a language disability, it is like so obvious. And it only takes them about 5 minutes to figure that out. And it's even obvious. And my examiners in my research, none of them were SLPs, none of them. So like paraprofessionals, undergraduate research assistants, they can tell in just 5 minutes. And the modifiability ratings are designed to like draw attention to the examiner of what they're supposed to be looking for. Things like rate of learning, how many errors they're making, distractions, right? And so the examiner just rates the child on those particular observations. What am I missing? Errors, confidence,
frustration.
Oh, frustration. Yeah.
Mhm. Confidence. Yep. Rate. Yeah. And Maria, I think it's Resendez. Forgive me if that's wrong. I'm embarrassed. I'm 99% sure this is Maria's study. Resendez with Pena did a study on the reliability of modifiability ratings. It's a great study that she did. I think this was for her dissertation. And then also we have taken great care to investigate that very thing in all of the dynamic assessment studies that we have done, because we have had that same question, Janet, that you've had. And it is true that we don't get great inter-rater reliability if you go point to point to point. In other words, some people will rate a child as like a 4 in their modifiability, like the very, very highest on the scale. And then some people will rate that same child as a 3. But here's where we're finding really exceptionally good inter-rater reliability. And that is this child rated on the low end or on the high end of that scale, this dichotomy, which is what we're really looking at, right? This is a dichotomous test. Do you or don't you have a language disorder? And when you dichotomize the scale, you get close to 100% inter-rater reliability. As Trina, you mentioned, you can totally tell whether you have a lot of experience or hardly any experience at all working with children. You can tell when it is frustrating, when it's going slow, when the children don't have very much confidence. All of these observable behaviors that Trina, as an applied behavior analyst, was able to really operationalize for us. You can taste them. That's not the right word. That's not a behavioral term. But you can totally tell when someone is struggling, and that is reflective of a language disorder.
Yeah, the trick is to set up the instructional task to be very intensive and effective, right? And for anyone who struggles with this task that we've just made it so easy to be successful on, and as soon as they struggle, you're like, oh, that's one, right? Because it's about learning, like how good of a learner are they, as opposed to how much do they know. And it is really obvious. The teachers or the paraprofessionals that have worked with us, they're like, holy cow, I had no idea it was this easy to like identify these kids. And here, schools are struggling left and right to be able to identify kids with disabilities accurately.
And
but
you know, we are
using static tests. So.
Sorry. Yeah, we are exploring some other variables. We found that the length of time, how long it takes to go through the teaching phase, is something you can actually quantify. And it is true that the children with language disorder take longer. We've been a little resistant or hesitant to publish that right now, just because you have to have a very standardized teaching approach for time to work, right? Because people might take longer in the teaching phase because they're not following a standardized procedure. And so that may not reflect that the child has a disorder. But that is one variable that's coming out as quite predictive. As is the post-test performance, actually. That's another predictor. Not nearly as strong as modifiability, though. Modifiability alone gets you 70 to 80% accuracy, just that single variable. It's only when you add a couple other variables to it, primarily the post-test, that's where you'll really get strong sensitivity and specificity.
If you're interested in learning more about dynamic assessment, Doug and I did a couple podcasts on that topic with SLP Nerdcast, and you can watch those or listen to those. I guess you listen to them for free. You know, they also offer CEUs if you wanted to check that out. But it was a fun conversation about these exact issues of like why dynamic assessment is a stronger diagnostic tool and like how SLPs can use them in their practice. And,
Yeah.
as a school psychologist, sorry, Doug, I'm just going to keep going. As a school psychologist, dynamic assessment, it has a longer history, but it still is not accepted as a mainstream assessment approach. And I think next week, or I don't know, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking to some school psychs about it. And they always seem to love it, but then go, yeah, but my school can't do this, but they can.
And we're working on that. We're working on making dynamic assessment acceptable, and whatever that means. We're essentially working on the face validity of dynamic assessment, the efficiency of dynamic assessment, and also we're exploring the extent to which norms can be used as a reference for dynamic assessment. I did want to say that Oriana, I don't know her first name and I apologize, but Oriana and Dr. Ron Gillum did a study, and there may have been some other authors on there, and I apologize leaving anyone out. They did a systematic review, a meta-analysis of dynamic assessment. So if you're also interested in learning more about dynamic assessment, do read that paper. They do a really nice job of identifying the strengths and the weaknesses and where we're at right now in the current research. I think that was 2018 is when that came out.
I have no sense of time, Doug. None whatsoever.
It's hard. I know.
I don't know, but I remember being so excited about that meta-analysis because they really just pulled it all together. It was great. It was really great. And they, critically review our things too. Yeah. Right. And speaking about a meta-analysis, there was a recent meta-analysis of interventions designed to improve narrative language that obviously included many of our studies by Pico Herring. Those are the two authors that I know, and I can't remember. There are some others on there, but it was an LSHSS meta-analysis too. Yeah, it was an LSHSS. But that's a really great summary of, narrative intervention studies. And they're, independent of us, so they can criticize us all they want. So don't let them.
Ida asked about morphological assessment, and I do want to let Ida and everyone know that Julie Wolter published a fabulous study on a dynamic assessment of morphological awareness or morphological processing. I'm not sure which, but it's a great study. She got fabulous research results. So please look up that study by Julie Wolter. And I don't know when it came out, probably around 2016-ish, but like Trina, I lose track of time too. So that's like another great reference. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, goodness gracious. It seemed like there was something else I was going to say about a Story Champ study. You also were a first author on another paper with second grade, delivered by the teachers too. It was a whole group, right? The whole class.
That's right.
Reading comprehension and writing outcomes. I just remember those are the two outcomes, and it's published in TLD, Topics in Language.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this was a collaboration with Jessica Waldron, and this is it's a preliminary. It's an early stage study, but I think it's incredibly exciting because this is with second grade students, and the outcome measure was reading comprehension, or at least that was one of the outcome measures. And we found that the children in the treatment group had significantly stronger reading comprehension performance compared to children in a control group after a very low dose, again, of large group Story Champs intervention delivered by the teachers in the schools. So yeah, that I don't mean to forget about all these studies, I'm sorry, but yeah, I felt like that was a very profound study for us actually, because it's really showing directly the link between the oral language intervention or instruction, and the students were not, nothing else changed in their lives. It was just that oral language instruction that the treatment group got. And that made a significant impact on their reading comprehension.
Yeah, we already had several studies like Megan's and our 2018 study that showed the transfer from oral to written language, writing samples. But that one had reading comprehension as an outcome, which was awesome. It was a really good one. I just remembered of a couple others that we probably should mention. So I partnered with Maria Nelly in Mexico on a study, and Doug partnered with some folks in India to use story champs. So I'll just tell you mine really quickly. Maria Nelly delivered story champs to a whole class of 5th and 6th graders in Mexico it was during their English lesson, right? So they were learning English as a foreign language. And so they used story champs. And the study is actually published in a Mexican journal. So all I could read was the English version of it, and now it's published in Spanish. But that was one study. And then Doug, yours, the India study?
Yeah, so we partnered with Anuradha Rai through the ECHO organization in India. And this was also with an amazing student of mine, Brenna Skadden Nelson. And Brenna was an undergraduate when she did this study. So we worked with teachers in doing large group oral narrative language intervention with children in India. And this was a tiered approach. We had large group and small group, and the small group was delivered from the United States over the ECHO. Well, we used Zoom as our technology, but we also used this ECHO training format where we trained the teachers frequently on how to do the large group interventions. And we got significant results in reading comprehension once again, even though the focus was oral language intervention and instruction. So yeah, that was a very exciting study. And I have to give a shout out to Brigham Young University, which had the most amazing funding for us to go to India and to be hosted by our dear friend Anuradha, who is the most gracious host ever. We felt like celebrities over there. It was an amazing study. I think that is, I'm trying to remember where that's published. It's an international journal. And I'll find that. I'll put it down in the chat.
Oh, I have it. It's in my dissertation references. Like, I'll get it quicker. Super cool question by Janet. So do you all know, I know this is like perfect timing also to wrap up this webinar soon, but yeah, intervention studies of narrative intervention for children using AAC. And then Bern, I'm going to put a link for you into the chat about where do you get a list of all these specific studies. We will constantly update them, but I'm going to link you to the place where we will update them so that you have it in perpetuity. But yeah, AAC.
Janet's question.
AAC, yeah, please.
Oh, so let's say, if it hadn't been of COVID, I would have already had a study like this. So I recently won a Fulbright to go to South Africa, and I'm supposed to be studying AAC narrative intervention there at the Center for AAC. I am actually going to be going this spring, but I've shortened my time, so I'm not sure I'm going to get a full study in. But one of the reasons why I wanted to go was to beef up my AAC knowledge, since it's been several years since I was in the schools and I was working with AAC users. But also because we have a lot of SLPs who use story champs with AAC users, and they're always saying how much they love it, but they wish this, right? They wish this, they have to do some adaptations, which I totally understand. And at one point they invited me to come see their interventions in Chicago. And I got to do this little tour of all these different schools and these SLPs who were using story champs with AAC users. And I was like, okay, I'm watching how you're doing this. I can do this. I can make you better stories. I can make you better procedures. So that's definitely been in my queue, and I cannot wait to go to South Africa so I can have the concentrated time for it. Because there are many people using it, but we have not yet published an AAC narrative intervention study. Now, there are others who have, like Soto is the one that's standing out in my mind, that she has published several AAC narrative intervention studies.
And Megan, you just posted something on Facebook where you had someone in a webinar who had developed something with, I think it was with Boardmaker or something like that, and had modified story champs to work with some of their students.
Yeah, so there's a lot of help that's needed. So when we look forward to future research, This is another area you two all don't have enough on your plate. But by also maybe inspiring other people to do stuff. But I've seen also on, I want to say teachers pay teachers, but I hate saying that. Probably is where I've also seen some adaptations for AAC specifically related to story jams. I mean, like people are trying, but there's just not enough out there. So yeah.
Yeah, well, we can, as the designer of these interventions, like I can do a better job of that. And I actually have some draft AAC stories and draft AAC procedures. It just, we've really got to do the research before we share it broadly. But one of the things I wanted to point out is that one of the things that struck me as Doug was talking is like, we really do work with partners, right? It's not like this is Trina and Doug's research. It's like we are working with students, we're working with a lot of colleagues from different places and a lot of community partners. And oftentimes the research questions come from the community, right? They email us and say, hey, I'm really interested in doing this. We need more research with this population or for AAC users, right? That's how we build partnerships. And that's one of the great things about our job is that we can kind of respond to the community and tell us what it is they need, right? So that we can then, create the products or the interventions or assessment tools that are needed in the field. And that's one of the best part about the kind of work we do. So anytime anybody wants to partner with us or is interested in some research in a specific area, just email us or say, hey, let's do this, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're so right. And I feel like a shout out to Maureen Staskowski in Michigan is so needed. She was such an important partner with us in this recent publication on story champs, this large scale study that we did. So I just publicly need to express my love and appreciation to Maureen for her partnership. And like Trina said, we need these partnerships because that's what we're doing now. We're not asking really simple efficacy questions anymore. We're really asking questions about implementation science. And we need partners to make that happen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And extensions to the work and, what revisions are needed. We'd really rather the research questions come from the community directly rather than us telling you what you need.
And Ida's question she asked earlier is a perfect example of that, right? Where she's asking about the cubed assessment and she wants to know why on the DDM, we stop at the silent E as the pretest. So we have a CVC pretest, a CCVC pretest, and then a silent E. And Ida is so right. And I don't know if she's just being nice, but what she really should be saying is you need more than just those things in that test. And she's so right. And that's what we're actually doing. I promise you, I have this right here. This is my list of things that we are changing on the cubed assessment. And that is first and foremost, one of the things that we're going to be changing very soon here is just adding some additional items. So yeah, please, I hope none of you think that we're particularly sensitive. We need the feedback. We need to know, what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really glad that you said that, Doug, because, you're exactly right. Like we know that they're not perfect. We're just going to iterate, right? We're just going to work it out and figure it out. And we want to do that with the people that are actually in the trenches. By the way, Doug and I used to be in the schools, but at the point where we started to get our PhD, we were like, oh, got to leave the kids. But then at the same time, there are some advantages of being university faculty, but we miss being in the schools. We miss those interactions. So we kind of have to live vicariously through others who are in the schools with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're tapped out, Megan.
I think, yeah, unless anybody else has any questions, I'm thrilled. This was a sizable attendance given that it's heavy sciencey research. But I think we're excited. I think I'm excited. I'm pretty sure, but I know that there's a lot of things that we want to talk about that are coming down the pike, and I want to hesitant to talk about it, right? So I think that greatest advice I would give to anybody attending is that if any of this intrigues you at all, and you're like, man, I wonder if I could test things out, right? I wonder if I could give them feedback on X, Y, and Z. Email us. My email's in there, Trina's, Doug's, and there's opportunities that we would love. You know, it's almost like beta testing, right? Give us some feedback. Let us know your thoughts. If you already have a list of things that you could give advice on, send it to me. And I'll synthesize that information. But absolutely, this has been wonderful. There's been a lot of information shared tonight that can be overwhelming, but it's so much good that you all are doing. This is why I love working for LDG. It's exciting.
And we need you, Megan. You know, she's not just like our hostess here. She's a researcher too, a very, very good one. Very
bitty baby, little early career. So on that note, wonderful. I hope all of you have a great weekend. Thank you to our Australia, New Zealand folk who are spending their Friday morning with us. And thank you to everybody over here on the East Coast. It's almost 8 p.m. So thanks, Trina, for staying up, and Doug joining us at the end of your workday. So we appreciate all of you and the panelists and hosts. So if you need anything, send us an email. We're always available to you. And take care. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night or morning.
Have a great day, great weekend, everybody.